story that exposes the real injustice of slavery, that begins to shift the entire culture to the point to say, yes, we're willing to go to war over this issue. I mean, we're talking about a society that was brought into this. So it was media that paved the way, creative media. During the time of the enslavement of the Congolese, around the turn of the century, in the early 1900s, King Leopold had control over the Congo, and he was using it to harvest all the natural resources. It was one of the most brutal, genocidal plunderings and enslavements in all of human history. It was absolutely horrifying what he was doing. But he denied any kind of oppressive, actions, anything like that. Until the first photojournalist ever went into the Congo, now with the invention of the portable camera, and began to document what was happening, began to document in real pictures. Then she went out, she had what was called magic lantern screenings. They were the first documentary screenings. And it was she took these pictures, she put them onto a projector, and she had 210 screenings in about 49 cities around Europe and America, just showing people, here's what's going on in the Congo, here's what's going on in the Congo. What she did is she raised a global outcry against what was happening, forcing King Leopold to relinquish control of the Congo and thereby liberating the Congolese from the enslavement. All three abolition movements in history were paved through creative media, through storytelling, through changing the narrative, the understanding, the mindset, the consciousness of the people. Now, I believe that this is the challenge that lies before us today. When you think about our generation, and you think about the culture that we have grown up into, it is a different world than it was even when our parents grew up, and for sure when their parents grew up. It's a different world, really, than any other time in human history in many ways. We are the first generation to grow up in history with the mass proliferation of media and hypersexualized imagery in our generation. So when you think about the power of story and the role that story plays in developing the values of a culture, and you think about, well, who are the storytellers of our generation? It's no longer the village sage, right? Or the town pastor, or even the parents, like in previous generations. Today, the predominant storytellers of our culture are the advertising industry, the music industry, the film industry, the television industry, the pornography industry. Have you guys ever thought about this? Does it bother you that the place of storytelling, the sacred place of storytelling, that literally defines the narrative of a culture, that literally creates the values by which we live our life, has been taken from those that we would ascribe influence to, and that role has been assumed by people who have a financial motivation, right? And so it's corrupted the whole realm of storytelling. And something I'm going to talk a little bit about on Wednesday is how that in the 1950s, when suddenly in media they began to discover the value of exploiting women's sexuality in the context of media for financial gain. And this became woven into this commodification of female sexuality, became woven into the fabric of storytelling of every industry in our world, every major storyteller. And so it has set a trajectory for our culture where girls are socialized in our society to find value in their sexuality, to find their identity in their sexuality, to find empowerment through their sexuality. There's a single narrow story that is promoted through the storytellers of our culture that is grooming girls to be sold for sex in our culture today, or to sell themselves for sex. And in the same way, our culture grooms men to become consumers of women's sexuality, to become consumers of, if you think about the vast numbers of women being trafficked in our world. Here's a crazy thought. You think about these millions of people that are being sold in the sex industry today, right? And the number sounds staggering to us. But here's what's crazy. In order for those millions to be sold, what does that mean? That actually means that there are way more millions of men who are buying these women. Each one of these girls averages 5 to 10 clients a day. Those are very conservative numbers. So we're talking about nations like Germany, where there are 1.5 million purchases of sex per day. That means 1.5 million men renting a woman's body to rape every single day in Germany. And nations like Spain, 1.5 million per day. We don't know all the statistics, but in countries where these stats are emerging, it's startling. We can no longer just say, well, who are these men? We don't know. They're on the fringes of, society, and they're these kind of social deviants, and, there's these social derelicts, and they have horns, and they hang out on the dark side of the park at night, and they have hoods, nobody can ever really see their face, and there's these shadowy figures. No. We've spent so much time documenting this. These are doctors, these are lawyers, these are businessmen, these are heads of companies, these are your everyday men, teachers, these are educators, these are everyday men, these are normal men. We have created a society where men are socialized to buy women for sex, to consume sex for money. And I know that sounds crazy to some of you guys, but think about this. 90% of boys between the age of 8 to 16 years old are exposed to pornography. In interviewing dozens and dozens and dozens of young men about pornography, I started asking them, do you know anybody that doesn't watch pornography? And they said, no. No, I don't know anyone that doesn't watch pornography. I mean, think about that. What we are talking about is technologized prostitution. It is a generation of men receiving their sexual education through pornography, right? And then they are actually consuming prostitution sex. They are consuming women who are being paid for sex in a sexual encounter. That is technologized prostitution. We are raising up a generation of sex buyers by virtue of the stories that we are telling in our culture today. And I don't have time to go into all the stories that are being told and how I'm constructing these ideas. I'll do that in another context. But just to say that I feel like one of the major battlefronts that lies before us in the realm of abolition is this facilitating culture, this narrative that has been constructed, this world that we have created, where men grow up with a value system of entitlement to women's bodies. And women grow up with a value system believing that their value is knit to their sexuality. In some ways, in a very exclusive way. And so our effort, like abolitionists of previous generations, is to shift the cultural narrative, to shift the locus of thought in society, to change and to shift the conscience of society, to literally invoke a countercultural revolution. And I know that language is often overused, but I believe in this context it's so important for us to understand that we must invoke a countercultural revolution to reclaim the stories that once belonged to the people, to reclaim our sexuality, to reclaim our masculinity, our femininity, what it means to be human, what it means to be an empathetic human being, right?
Yeah.
I started developing this blog called Becoming Christ-Like in a Sociopathic Society, because when you think about it, our culture is grooming people to become sociopaths. We'll become emotionally disconnected from those around us. But what Jesus modeled is a version of masculinity in which he was empathetically connected to those around him. That is one of the 4 key core characteristics that define Jesus, was his empathy. He was intimately connected to people in a personal, deep, personal, caring, meaningful way. so that his transmissions of truth were all validated by the place of his connectivity to those around him. But our culture has become this sociopathic culture. We have to recover that which has been stolen from us. My friend recently had a dream. He just sent me 2 days ago. And it was I won't go into all the details of it, but basically the dream was about calling forth salmon. And in the nations of the earth, and calling a nation to become salmon. And just to give you the long and the short of it, basically the idea was that salmon are born in these pure freshwater streams. And eventually they make their way down these large rivers through tumultuous waters to these vast open oceans of salt water and sharks and all of that. But eventually what happens in the life cycle of the salmon is they return. And they have to go back upstream, back into those fresh waters where they were born. And the whole thing of it was that this dream was saying that he was saying to me that this is the journey that you are on. Is swimming back upstream to rediscover the place of innocence. And it just breaks my heart because we've talked to so many people and I said, what does innocence mean to you? I said, innocence doesn't even exist. Our generation has become so cynical. We are a corporately, sexually traumatized planet. And we have to tell a different story. Our work at Exodus right now is focused intensely on harnessing the power of media to turn the tide of a generation. We believe in the power of storytelling. The most core truths that Jesus told, he told in the context of story. If we are going to turn the tide on this issue of sex trafficking, it's going to have to be by shifting the culture, right? Because, the images will never leave my brain of the brothels in Cambodia that we filmed. These little concrete rooms with a wooden bed where girls are raped day and night. That picture will never leave my mind of blood-stained pajamas of 7-year-old girls in those dingy little brothels. And I think about that and it breaks my heart every day. But I think about, I don't want any more 9-year-olds to wind up in that position. And if you think about it, like I was thinking about this guy that I chased down in Cambodia and I got in his face and he was there to buy a child for sex, and I thought, this guy did not wake up yesterday and decide to go buy a child for sex. We are creating a generation of sex buyers by virtue of the stories we are telling in our culture. It's a toxic culture. It's a sick culture. Our culture has been stricken with cancer. And beloved, I believe that a significant part of the solution and the answer to this is harnessing the power of storytelling to rewrite the narrative of our culture, to invoke a counter-cultural revolution of some very key core values and ethics. So where we're going for the next 2 years is we're going to be releasing 3 films along these lines. Our thought is this: if men stop buying sex, we would end sex trafficking today. That's the bottom line. 98+% of people in trafficking situation are women and children. Okay, and the buyers are 99% men. Okay, so I'm not trying to, yes, there are some men out there, and I'm sure there are a couple women have bought, but so if we're just. But if men stop buying women for sex, we would end sex trafficking today. So we see this in several ways. We see this, first of all, rooted in the fact that men are receiving their sexual education as young boys through pornography. When we talked to men who are sex buyers, and we asked them about their trajectory into the sex industry, where they became Johns, it all started with childhood exposure to porn. And then what we did in the editing of this documentary is we started taking those images of them as children and overlaying it with their testimony of the things that they were seeing at 7 and 8 years old. And it's utterly heartbreaking. Because when it's a grown man who's a sex, he's talking about it, you can kind of feel a little bit disconnected. Then when you see, this was an innocent 7-year-old boy. He wasn't asking for this. Pornography came trespassing into his life. corrupted his view, literally rewrote the neurological pathways in his brain, formed addictions in him, formed a sexual template in him. I mean, if you think about that as a few pornographers in the San Fernando Valley shaping the sexual template of an entire generation, it's horrifying. So what we're doing is we're creating, and then we see that it's also a part of the larger culture as well. It's not just pornography, it's also rooted in the larger culture. And so what we're doing is we're creating 3 films. One that focuses on the story of the Johns, of male sex buyers. And we conducted interviews with about 12 Johns, 12 sex buyers. And it lays forth the grooming of a sex buyer, answers the question of, you know, how does this problem exist, and how does a person reach this point? And so that is what we see as kind of the sequel to Nefarious, whereas Nefarious was about what is happening to the girls and what is happening in the realm of sex trafficking. This next film is more about why it's happening, with an emphasis on the guys who are purchasing these women. It also has a very powerful, strong redemption component as well. Then we're releasing a film after that that our working title for is Liberated, the New Sexual Revolution, which documents this thing that I've been talking about, the culture, the role that the culture plays in socializing girls to be sold for sex and socializing men with an entitlement to women's bodies. And so we feel that that larger cultural context is important for people to take an inventory for the fact that we have grown up in a great social experiment called a media age. And the film dives deep into that subject matter. We are also editing that film right now as we speak. And the third film that we're releasing is one on the porn industry, with interviews exclusively with people inside the porn industry. Producers, agents, performers, the Free Speech Coalition, all the key players in the porn industry. And the main focus of that documentary on the porn industry is to show the trajectory of a girl coming into the industry and then what happens to her in the context of her journey into porn. It's a very, very sad portrait. But we want to expose what is happening in the porn industry. So each one of these films indicts the porn industry in a different way, from a public health issue, to a human rights issue, to an occupational health issue. Each one of these films creates the stakes around this very black and white issue of sex trafficking, that we can all agree that's wrong for a person to be forced against their will into a place of sexual exploitation. So those are the stakes that we're dealing with in each one of these. And each one of these films is aimed at telling a story that will reshape the way that we understand these issues of the world that we live in. Our focus through these films, like I said, is to ignite a countercultural revolution. And so we need your participation with us in this endeavor over the course of the next couple of years. We'll be releasing a film starting in next fall, about every 6 months, 6 to 8, 12 months, one after the other, okay? And what we're gonna be looking to do is engineer a grassroots movement of people constituted by people like yourself who will be community organizers for us, partner with us, and mobilizing grassroots screenings on the ground in key geographic regions throughout the United States to thrust this issue to the forefront of people's consciousness. Where people can no longer passively ignore the destruction that pornography and the storytellers that are in media are wreaking upon our planet. There's this passage in Psalms, just in wrapping it up here. I'm sorry, not in Psalms, in 2 Kings. If you brought your Bible, you can turn to 2 Kings chapter 13. 2 Kings chapter 13. Verse 14. says Elisha had become sick with illness of which he would die. Then Joash, the king of Israel, came down to him and wept over his face and said, O my father, the chariots of Israel and the horsemen. And Elisha said to him, Take a bow and some arrows. So he took himself a bow and some arrows. Then he said to the king of Israel, Put your hand on the bow. So he put his hand on it. And Elisha put his hand on the king's hand. And he said, Open the east window. And he opened it. Then Elisha said, Shoot. And he shot. And he said, The arrow of the Lord's deliverance, and the arrow of deliverance from Syria. For you must strike the Syrians at Aphek until you destroyed them. Then he said, Take the arrows. So he took them. And he said to the king of Israel, Strike the ground. So he struck the ground 3 times and stopped. And the man of God was angry with him. And he said, You should have struck 5 or 6 times. Then you would have struck Syria till you had destroyed it. But now you will strike Syria only 3 times. Let me just tell you what I feel this story is communicating and how it applies to what we're talking about. I believe that we are approaching a Kairos moment where God is going to release his favor on efforts to shift the culture, on the messages that will redefine the values and the identity of men and women and our sexuality. I believe that God is going to release favor, unprecedented favor, upon these efforts. Elisha, when Joash says to Elisha, "Oh my father, the chariots of Israel and the horse and of Israel and their horsemen," what he's saying to him as the spiritual leader of this nation, you are the greatest line of defense for our country. And he was lamenting the passing of Elisha as he's on his deathbed, uncertain about the future of Israel. And what happens is that God, through Elisha, opens up a window of opportunity. He opens up a door, so to speak, for Joash. And he shoots the arrows, and it's symbolic now of God's victory over their enemies. And when we're reading this story, we don't fully get it because we live in America. And so we're not concerned about Mexico or Canada invading our borders and overtaking us. I hope. I guess it's not very likely. But if you're in Israel and you're surrounded, literally surrounded by enemies, I mean, they live with a boot on their neck continually. This represents an unprecedented opportunity of divine favor through Elisha that God is releasing to the king of Israel. And when he says to him, strike the ground, what he is saying is that arrow is symbolic of the deliverance. Show me what you got. And he goes, and it says the man of God was angry. And that word means he was ready to explode with rage. He was so furious. Now this isn't Elijah. This is Elisha. Elisha was called by one commentator the mother prophet because he was so nurturing and compassionate. He was a completely different guy than Elijah. Okay? He was ready to explode with rage because he understood prophetically what was happening. The season that they were in, the favor that was being released to them, the door that was being opened to them. And he understood that had the king of Israel had the zeal of the Lord, that it would have meant deliverance from their enemies for generations to come. And instead he was prophetically seeing the destruction of their land, their wives, their children, because the king lacked fire. And so, even as we at Exodus Christ are posturing our heart in this season, we believe that God is opening up a door for us in the next 2 to 3 years through these films to make a significant impact on the culture. And we're asking God, put a fire in our hearts. Stir our hearts with zeal to seize this moment of opportunity, to seize this open door, to seize this moment of favor, to bring about an impact in our culture that could cripple one of the pillars of sex trafficking in our world. Demand will not end by itself if we just go about business as usual, but it will implode on itself if we reconstruct the narrative of our culture, of what it means to be a man and how we view women. It will implode on itself. Now again, think about this. Millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of men purchasing sex in our world every single day. This isn't just a problem that we can ignore. It's just a few. This is right in the mainstream of our world today. And if we define pornography as technologized prostitution, what we would have to say is 90+% of men in our culture today are sex buyers. That is scary. So this issue of sex trafficking does not happen in a vacuum. And I could talk about sex trafficking in shocking ways all day, telling stories, connecting you to the stories, to what's happening. And we can talk about that, and we need to talk about that. But at some point, we have to shift the conversation to say, what are we doing to bring an end to it? I don't want to just keep telling the stories of sex trafficking and getting people to get riled up to do what? To hear from more sex trafficking victims while these men over here are completely ignored that are the source and the root of the problem? We have to pull this thing up by the roots. I don't know. I'm ready to give my life to this. I'm ready to hurl my entire life into this, and I don't know how far we will get, but I'm asking God, raise up an army.
Yes.
Raise up an army of others that will give their lives to the uprooting of this injustice. And let's see how much of an impact we can make. Let's see how far we can get. Maybe we'll end sex trafficking in a city, in a state, an entire nation. Maybe we'll curb the demand on a global scale beyond anything we could ever imagine. We don't know, but we have to be willing to try.
Yes.
So we want to invite you guys today who are here present at this meeting to partner with us as we move forward in this endeavor in the next several years. As community organizers, as volunteers, as prayer partners, as financial partners of Exodus Christ. We want you to be involved. We want you to take these stories that we tell. We want you to run with them. And they could be your own stories. It might be you writing a book. It might be you creating a documentary. We can work together towards this end to create a countercultural revolution. We're going to go into a time of question and answer. But I want to highlight to you that what you guys, when you guys came in and sat down, there's a little booklet in front of you, and it says Nefarious on the back and Exodus Cry on the front. And there's a little place in there for you to fill out your information. We just want to encourage you guys to fill out your information before you leave so we can stay in touch with you. Because what we're going to do is we're going to send you a follow-up email with some instructions on how you can be involved in our future initiatives in the course of the next couple of years. Some of you guys may desire to partner with us financially. Obviously, that is very helpful for us.